Hello world, welcome to another episode of Outside the Valley, a podcast where we interview remote startup leaders, remote workers, remote work advocates, and companies who thrive outside of Silicon Valley. This is the podcast where remote companies share what works and what doesn't so you can do it right. Outside the Valley is brought to you by ARC, the remote hiring platform that helps you hire remote software engineer and teams easily. I'm your host, Giacomo. Today, I'm joined by Peldi, the founder and CEO of Balsamiq. In this episode, we talked about Balsamiq's culture, more specifically around the core value of continuous learning and the importance of experimental mindset inside a company, the challenges Peldi experienced as a leader as Balsamiq scale, and more. We also had a quick peek into Balsamiq's hiring and onboarding process, why Peldi strongly prefers to employ remote team members rather than have them as contractors, which is a very common practice amongst remote or distributed companies. I really admire the self-aware nature of Balsamiq, which is a byproduct of Peldi's personality as a founder and a leader. I really enjoy this conversation and I hope you do too. So here we go. Hello Peldi, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Great. It's really great to have you here. And I've been really following your podcast interview even before I launched the podcast, especially when the podcast was Indie Hackers. It's just amazing. I love how I described you to my colleagues here. So before I started the podcast, hey, I'll be interviewing Peldi from Balsamiq. He was a very cool guy. He's a very cool guy. And he sounds like this great Italian uncle that is so good at business. Hope this doesn't offend you.
That's nice. Thanks.
Right. But yeah, I think that's also, other than the fact that Balsamiq's remote team, is also the fact that your philosophy in business is actually quite fascinating. Would love to go into that in a minute. So before we started, for the audience here, can you tell us a bit about the history of Balsamiq? As in, like, why did you started it? And more importantly, why did you choose to return to Italy instead of staying in the US?
Sure. So Balsamiq, we make a low fidelity wireframing tool. So I don't know if your audience is very technical about user experience or not.
They probably heard about you. So
okay, great.
Yeah.
So I won't go into too much detail.
Mm-hmm.
But so I started 11 years ago. I was living in San Francisco, but I decided to try starting a business, and I couldn't afford to do it in San Francisco. And so I thought I could move back to Italy and try to do it from here, where cost of living was much, much lower. And try it for a year or two, and then if it didn't work out, I will move back to San Francisco and get another job. So that's the main reason why I moved here.
So when you got back to Italy, in Bologna, right, at that time?
That's where I grew up. That's where my family is.
Right. And was your first hire is also based in Italy?
Yes.
Right. And is he? I suppose it's a remote hire, right?
Well, at first he used to come to my house. I had a room that was my office, and so he would come in the morning and go through my bedroom and wave at my wife, and then go to the office. So at the beginning, we had an office, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But my second hire, which happened maybe a month after the first hire, was in San Francisco. So fully remote from the beginning. And then we have been sort of this mixture of remote and Bologna office since then.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we have a beautiful new office with 35 desks.
Oh, really?
In Bologna, but usually around 3 or 4 people show up every day.
Right.
And that's intended. Everybody has their own office at home, and we're optimized for working remotely.
So I found it interesting because there are some companies that deliberately start as a remote team in the beginning. But there are some companies that just, oh, this is just how I hire. The so-called remote work is just how I did in the first place. It's just natural to me. So you mentioned that your second hire is based in San Francisco. Was there any thought, hey, this guy is not in the same space, is not the same country as me? How do I make sure that he will do the job? So on and so forth. Was there any thought, or just like it just come natural to you?
Well, yeah. First of all, it was a she. The second hire, it
Oh, I
was
apologize. Yeah.
a woman, but that's okay. Um, the decision to hire someone in California was very deliberate
Mm-hmm.
because that's where a lot of our customers were.
I
And
see.
so the second person was a support person. And
Okay.
so I wanted to have a distributed company so that we could support customers both in Europe and in the US
Mm-hmm.
very well. So for a while, I worked every night and I would answer the phone in the middle of the night here in Italy.
Goodness.
Um, I did that for 8 months, and then I decided it's better if someone who lives there can do support. So that was the primary reason why I wanted to have a remote employee in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the issue about managing was never a big issue for me. I was in my previous career, I was never a professional manager. I was a
Mm-hmm.
programmer. I led a team, and we were all in the same office, but we had collaborators in India, etc. So
I see.
I was pretty. I wasn't afraid of the remote part, and it was never been a big problem at all. I don't know why, but I put a lot of trust in my employees, and
Mm.
they rise up to the occasion usually, and we just collaborate. I don't have to micromanage anyone.
How big is Balsamiq now?
We are 33 people right now.
Right. So when I was doing research, so I found this Balsamiq, in my opinion, has a some kind of unique company culture. I will describe it as self-aware. So that was the
Hmm.
first thing, and self-aware and honest. That's the other two things that came to mind. Self-aware, honest, and fun. Like you're not taking
Okay.
yourself too seriously and whatnot. So
Tell me how you came to those
right. Okay.
adjectives.
I think it's on the one of your blog posts about the company culture. I'm actually, let me just, probably have it about policies. And there is this, okay, actually, let me, I'll pull that back. The first one is from your career page. You started
Hmm.
by why you probably won't like it here. And it's a long list, and it's not a BS list. Like, this is something that very honest, in my opinion. And the second one, and then you start why will you probably will like it here. And there's another post that is basically saying, oh, okay, we share all of this, but we are afraid to be seen as humble bragging, right? And
Hmm.
I think that's is very self-aware, because a lot of
Hmm.
companies trying to be, an open startup and transparent, and it actually is good for the marketing. But I feel like Balsamiq has this self-awareness, like, okay, we are not perfect, and there are chances that you'll see us as, so humble bragging and so on, but it is what it is, and what we are trying to do is just learn along the way. So that was the culture that I found very interesting in Balsamiq. Does it make sense?
Yes, yes. I'm glad because
Right.
I like all those adjectives that you used.
Yeah. Yeah. And the interesting part, so what I want to ask is because, right, for these cultures, right, if you agree with, like, I think the one that sounds the most is self-awareness and continuous learning. Was there any deliberate practices or things that you or the Balsamiq team do, either is company policies or communication policies that um, makes you that helps maintain this culture, if that makes sense, some deliberate things?
Sure. Let me see.
Mm-hmm.
So the culture of learning, of continuous learning, has been sort of part of our DNA from the very
Right.
beginning. Um, that was and still is the main thing that motivates me
Mm-hmm.
um, in life.
Right.
And so I think uh, over time, it's sort of part of the company's DNA. I've been able to pass that love of learning and
Mm-hmm.
the no fear of experimenting
Right.
to my team, and we sort of hire people uh, who like to work that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So so I think that that came from me from the beginning, but it's been amplified by other people, by people coming. The we as far as deliberate policies, etc. We have these mottos and these company values,
Mm-hmm.
and we do say there that everything should be treated as an experiment.
Got it.
Um, you know, it's a big part of our
Right.
company culture,
Yeah.
for sure. And so we reinforce that in our handbook and in our actions, and we celebrate when someone experiments with something, and even if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. As long as we learn. We use very few outside contractors, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
because we
Right.
want the learning to stay in the company. That's
I
kind of
see.
what's fun. We also choose to do things ourselves, and we don't do them as well as an expert would. But the fact that we're learning while we do it matters to us. It makes our job fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the equation as well. It's not just about the polished output. We also care about, in fact, we care more about how we got there, what we learned, and yeah.
Yeah, I totally noticed that the like you mentioned the DNA of continuous learning. I feel like it came from you as the founder because some from your other interviews, like you repeatedly mentioned that this is your value, and that's how it become the DNA of Balsamiq itself.
Yeah.
So other than continuous learning, is there any other thing or any other of your character, so to speak, that became the DNA of the company?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, especially the beginning. I mean, we're bootstrapped. This is my
Mm-hmm.
first business.
Right.
We try things out as we go. So uh, certainly aspects of my personality or how I think a business should be run
Right.
has become a part of the balsamic culture. But it's also been 11 years and a lot of people. So now I feel like it's less and less about me or
Uh,
how I want to do things, and more
right.
about how, as a company, as a group of people,
Mm-hmm.
we like to work. And it's changed a lot over time. So that line between we do things this way because I want me, the owner, wants to do it that way, versus let's do it this way because we collectively think
Mm-hmm.
it's a good thing to do, it has blurred a lot.
Right.
In fact, more and more, I try to make my own opinions count less than they did in the past.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that. So before I was talking to the CEO of TextJar, CEO and founder of TextJar, Mark Fagiano, and he actually had the exactly same feeling like when you're like 10 people and they're actually now 100 people in TextJar, and there's this feeling of, I wouldn't say desperateness. I wouldn't say in a real negative way. Desperate in saying that you have to, as a startup founder, you have to accept that things will take longer because you need processes and
Sure.
whatnot. So now you're like 33 people, right? If you look back from where Balsamiq was like, let's say 10 people, and now you're 33. as you're growing, was there some kind of growing pains or challenges that was quite vivid in your mind?
Always,
Okay.
always.
Mm-hmm.
Even going from 1 to 10, or even one
Right.
to two, or
Mhm.
even um, absolutely always. It goes through phases
Right.
where we think we have it figured out, and then we grow and things change, and we have to come up with another way to work,
Mm-hmm.
another way to collaborate. And so then that's painful, and then we change things and adapt,
Mm-hmm.
and spend 6 months doing that, and then we feel good again, and we
Right.
figure it out, and then 6 months later we got to do it all again. So we
Right.
say that as a company, I think we're on version 5. So
Okay.
about every 2 years
Mm-hmm.
we have to come up with a new version of the company,
Right.
and I think that's because it grows. The growth is uh, what drives this transformation.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you can recall specific examples on probably seems like kind of like a code refactoring in a way, right? Is there
Yeah.
specific examples where you think, okay, this doesn't work and we need to do like big quote unquote refactoring of the company when you as you're growing?
Yes, I've spoken about these phases before.
I see.
But even doing the first hire,
Right.
that's a huge scary thing. I didn't sleep for a while
Mm-hmm.
before
Wow.
pulling the trigger, because I didn't want to hire anybody. I wanted to.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
dream was to have a single person company.
Right.
Then we got to 5 people, and I thought this is it forever. But then customers kept coming and coming, and I didn't want a big team. I didn't feel comfortable leading a bigger team, but we had to, because we were struggling under the demand. So I had to let go of my dream and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Later, we went from 10 to 16 within a year. That's almost, what, a time and a half,
Right.
almost 2 times as big. And that changed everything. Then we decided, well, we need to write a handbook, because we
Wow.
can't just
Okay.
do word of mouth and talk to Peldi about
Exactly.
everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then as we got longer, I had to give up several parts of my job, several of my
Mm-hmm.
different jobs that I did, and some were easier to delegate, some were harder. And then right now we're in the middle of an experimentation phase where we still don't have people managers, but we feel the need for someone to do those kind of jobs.
Ah, I see.
And so right now we're trying different things on different teams, um, to see how we can solve that problem. We split into teams. That was a big change. We didn't
Okay.
do that
Right.
for a long time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So as you grow, you kind of have to organically come up with new solutions all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a better way where you get VC funding and they give you a CEO that knows what they're doing,
Right.
and and a whole executive team, and they've done it before and they know what they're doing. But that's not the goal for me and
Right.
for us. In fact, these are great. Growing pains are, as long as the market allows us to take our time and figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what we want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's really fascinating. But and I also think that the getting back to the DNA of continuous learning it also helps. Like you mentioned that right now you're experimenting with having teams or having people managers, but before even on your website, it's like you're saying we don't have managers. You all directly work with help, but now you're experimenting to it, which means basically you are open to change. Balsamiq team is open to change opinions whenever it's needed. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a really good reflection. In my opinion, it's a really good reflection of the DNA.
Yeah. In fact, I
So
was a little cringing when you mentioned the jobs page, because that, when I read that now, it feels very outdated. I have it on my list to update it in the next few months, because
okay.
the company has changed a lot since.
Ah, I
We
see.
have other pros and other cons to list on that
Right,
page.
right. Dang, my research is outdated then. But yes,
Well, it's my fault. It's our fault.
no problem.
The some things don't change, right? The
Of
values, the
course.
company values, the honesty is going to be there, even then
True.
if the data changes.
Mm-hmm.
But even the company values can change over time. We just spent, we did an effort a few months ago to redefine the company values internally, because after 10 years, the values that I wrote 10 years ago when I was a one-person company don't make sense anymore.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And it's not proper that the company uses my personal values from 10 years ago, right?
Right.
They're called company values. They're not called Peldi's values that the company uses,
Yeah.
So we just did a big effort where everybody was involved, and we came up with a new set of values that are more reflective of how we actually work
Mm-hmm.
right now. But at the beginning of it, it says, in 10 years, we're probably going to throw these away and do it again.
Yeah.
And we have to. You have to evolve with the company.
Yeah, and that's what I call the self-awareness part. That's what I got from the adjective from.
Got it.
So I want to move a bit about on Balsamiq's hiring process. So before you mentioned here and there about the tricky legal stuff that you had to go through when you're hiring a remote team or building a distributed team. Can you share a bit more about that shortly, or what challenges you face and potential advices for entrepreneurs that want to build a remote team?
Well, I mean, you probably know more about this than I do because you've interviewed more people. But basically, the crux of the issue is that national laws exist. Right? We live in a
Such a
global
shame.
society. Global society. The internet is all more or less the same. The tools are more or less the same, but the laws are different locally.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you hire someone, you have to abide by their local laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have two ways to do it. One is you sort of force this person to create a business and do a business to business transaction. Basically, they're contractors with their own business. And those are better defined because business to business commerce has been going and consulting has been happening for a long time. Those rules are well defined. Taxation is easy,
Mm-hmm.
and so a lot of remote companies operate that way. The other way is to use employment laws,
Yeah.
right, where people are actually your employees. And so to do that, in every country, state, province, and city where you hire someone, you have to abide by the local
Right.
laws, and you have to register, get a tax ID. You have to pay sales tax in that location. You're basically
True.
establishing what's called a nexus
Mm-hmm.
in that country. And
Yeah.
so that means you have to make sure that if the law changes, you change your practices.
Mm-hmm.
If the taxation changes, you change your taxation. So what it really means is that you have to hire an accountant
Right.
locally that knows about
The law.
foreign companies hiring local people. Then you have to hire a payroll person that makes sure that you follow the local laws, and they
Yeah.
calculate the net amount to pay and the taxes to pay every month. So both approaches have their pros and cons. Um, we tend to favor the employment
Mm-hmm.
part because it's a closer relationship.
Yeah. I agree.
With a contractor, you can't buy them a computer because they they have their own business. That's an
Right.
expense that they have. Sure, you could give them a bonus or whatever, you could price it into their invoices,
Right.
but in theory you're not supposed to give them anything. You're not.
I see.
They're a different business, right? Would you buy a computer to your
Clients.
accountant?
Yeah.
No, it makes
Yeah.
no sense, right?
Yeah.
You can't buy them a ticket to come and visit you because So they have to put all these things out of pocket, and then maybe you can reimburse them later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't give them a Christmas gift because it's like you're corrupting another business.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also they're not supposed to really only work for you,
Right.
they have a business consulting business, so it looks better for them if they work for more than one client.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just not what we want in our relationship with our employees.
Mm-hmm.
You're not even supposed to list them on your company page because they're not part of your company. They have their own company, right?
Hmm. True. Yeah.
Um, sure, it's a gray area, but in theory, if it's a business to business thing, you
Yeah.
have to uh, look at it that way.
Right.
So we do that with one person because that was their preference. They already had a business and they're
I
still
see.
running that business, but they also work for us as a consultant, so that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, we try to go the employment route. So
Mm-hmm.
what that means is that yes, we are remote, but since we're already set up in California, Illinois, France, and Germany, we strongly favor candidates from those four locations.
Ah, I see.
Because
I
if we
see.
had to get someone in China, we would have to register with the Chinese government, get a tax
Yeah.
ID, figure it out, hire accountants, payroll people. Um, so between the five locations where we are, we think that there's enough of a talent pool that we can hire from there. But for the right candidate, we might expand into another location. But
Okay.
it's a huge pain. It's a real
Okay.
pain.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are the unsexy part of a remote and distributed team. A lot of people just talking about, oh, remote teams unlock a pool of talent. It gives you, opens up opportunity and makes you more productive. But I honestly, as a startup founder, entrepreneur, these are the things that you have to figure out first. It reminds me of a tweet like I saw a couple months ago, or from the founder of Barometrics, Josh Pickford. He actually got he actually need to pay a tax from the state of Texas or something like that. For the listeners, I'll put the tweet in the notes when I found it. But yes, this is basically one of the cases where um, it's so complicated that it's really almost impossible for him to figure out that this law exists. So that's how complicated it is. But in the end, he needs to pay the tax. It's a couple of grand.
Yeah, but ignorance is no excuse. So every time you hire someone from another location, you're taking on more risk,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that means you have to abide by
Right.
local laws.
Agree. Still on the topic of hiring, is there any, so when Balsamiq is hiring, right? Is there any step in the hiring processes that you feel is quite unique to Balsamiq?
So we don't look at CVs.
Mm-hmm.
We don't ask for people to send a CV or a cover letter. We also don't do phone interviews right away to filter. Basically, what we do is whenever we have a job opening, we come up with this very specific list of questions
Right. Okay.
and create a form on the website with all those questions. And the form takes about an hour to fill in, and that's the first step. Um, so that takes care of filtering.
Mm-hmm.
We only really get
Totally.
people who really want to work for us, and also skips the whole first phone interview because we learn enough from their answers to be able to really get a sense for each candidate. So it helps us narrow down our selection very, very quickly. It's
Interesting.
asking a lot of people, but it also tells us how well they write, how well they can explain themselves. So it is a bit asking a lot of regular people who are probably applying for 100 jobs,
Mm-hmm.
but we're lucky that we're able to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
people still apply.
When someone is hired by Balsamiq, how do you do onboarding? Because this is something that comes up a lot when we're talking about dispute teams. Like Zapier has this Airbnb style onboarding that they ship the person to basically be on site for 1 or 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And other companies have
Yeah,
their
so
own.
we don't
How
do
about
that. We don't do that. In fact, often I only meet new hires after 10 months when we have the company retreat
you?
once a
Okay.
year. So it
Right.
depends on when they get
Oh.
hired. But no, we don't fly anybody anywhere
Mm-hmm.
because we don't need it. We're optimized for working remotely, and
Right.
so even this part should happen well remotely. So
Right.
what we do is we assign the new hire both a mentor and a buddy.
Okay.
So the buddy is someone generally in their same time zone,
Mm-hmm.
and it's someone who they can ask any questions about the company and how we work. It doesn't have to be necessarily about the work itself. It's more
Right.
about, is it true that we have unlimited vacation? Like
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
kind of questions about the policies. And then there's the mentor, and the mentor is the person that's going to train you on how to do the actual job.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's the person whose job you're taking because they are doing something else or they have too much, or you're taking part of their job usually,
Right.
right? And so we set up an onboarding program for each new hire, and it depends on what the job is, and it could go from 3 weeks to 6 months. It's on a case by case. We design.
A lot of companies that interviewed, basically they're saying that onboarding is the most important part, because a lot of times new hire, especially in distributed teams, they will kind of feel lost in a way. Like if the onboarding doesn't
Sure.
it's not done properly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This is not something that I am good at. For instance, you were
Oh.
asking about the company culture, right? So my style of onboarding was, oh, you're hired. All right, sink or swim.
Look.
Here's a bunch of work, right? Over time, I have been less involved with onboarding because it's just
Mm-hmm.
not something I'm good at. And but I think as a company, we do a good job now. We
Mm-hmm.
Someone else set up some good policies for this.
Right. Um, yeah, I think this is a good segue to my next question, which is on the broader topic about yourself. And this is actually a bit selfish, but because this is more like what I want to learn. So in terms of leadership, so on your podcast interview with Claire Lou in the know your the Heartbeat podcast. By the way, this is a thing that I do in this podcast. Basically, we're just promoting other people's podcasts because
Nice.
that's how I do research. Um, you mentioned about and I quote you, paraphrasing you here. Doing something that you're good at actually can hurt the team, right? In a way. So I want to ask about, how did you realize that? That's the first question. And the second question, what were the deliberate steps that you took to avoid doing doing that? Like doing things that you're good at, because it's probably like second nature, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's not intuitive right away. You think you should focus on what you're good at, and
Yeah.
everything will be fine. The way I realized this was I heard it on a interview with the co-founder of Buffer. He's the one that was saying that, and that was kind of eye-opening. And the thing that I did to stop doing that, so it's not one thing. It's really a
Mhm.
practice. You have to,
I see.
because the tendency is to always go back to what you're good at and do it. So it's more of a Zen thing where once in a while you have to step back and think, okay, am I doing anything? Am I helping, or long term is this what I should be doing, or should I train someone else to do this part?
Mm-hmm.
So this sort of strategic long term thinking is something that I think comes with practice,
Right.
and and at least I'm being very patient with myself, because I go back, I fall back into the trap of working on what I'm good at often, and it's also fine. Sometimes that's what the company needs for a while, but you can't just do it uh, forever, or at least periodically. You should try to think, all right, 5 years from now, should I still be doing this? Because everything you do, you're also learning and getting better.
Right.
So of course you're going to do it more. You're going to be asked to do it more. So
Mhm.
this is not just for the company, or this is for everybody. Never learn something that you don't want to be asked to do twice, right?
Right. Right.
um, and so as you work and as you're learning, think about short term. Yes, I need to do this project, so I will learn this thing.
Mhm.
And longer term, should someone else be working on this with me so that they can do this longer term? Maybe it's more interesting for them than for me.
My opinion is that when it comes to delegating or doing stuff yourself, like the negative effect of doing that is more amplified when you're in a remote team. Like, for example, in my opinion, it can be something like, oh, when you're doing stuff yourself, or Peldi doing stuff yourself, if you're new to the team, it's probably it can be misinterpreted as, oh, does he doesn't trust us or something like that. But I think that's one thing. But of course, it's a more complicated thing. But I think there's our delegating well, in my opinion, is super important in remote teams, because it's not like people cannot see what you're doing, right? And if you're in the same office, you can, hey boss, are you doing this? Oh yeah, I'm doing things. Let me just do it. That's nothing. It's a small issue. I want to do this myself, and it's and problem solve. But in remote teams, there's just like exponential like communication debt, so to speak. And then in the
Yeah.
end, it will makes everything slower and the morale is down, and so on.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Absolutely. So you have to, these are challenges and there's ways to solve them. You can communicate better, communicate more. You can, uh, be very clear about expectations,
Right.
and double check how people are feeling about things.
Yeah.
And people ask to meet me, spot meetings, just to see if something doesn't feel right. Always double
Hmm.
check, because 99% of the times it's because of the remote, because we
Right.
were not in the
Yeah.
same room. So
Correct. Yeah.
these misunderstandings happen.
Hmm.
So, just double check, and everything's fine usually, right?
Hmm.
So these are things that come with practice, I think, as people work remotely. And then after a while, you get to know the people that you work with, so you understand.
True.
You fill in those voids with trust and past experiences.
Right. Cool. Another thing I want to touch on is about team communication, right? I saw in some articles that in some of your interviews, Balsamiq has this golden hour, so to speak, where everyone's online. So I have two questions here. My first question is, was it always like that since it was like 5 or 10 people? And my second question is, are there any other communication policies that you deliberately implement? For example, how to ask for information, how do you talk, or and so on.
Sure. So yeah, the golden hour is the only hour that we sort of have in common, working hour that we have in common between California and Italy. So it's
Hmm.
8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in California, which
Okay.
is 5 to 6 p.m. here
Hmm.
in Italy.
Hmm.
Now, 8 a.m. is early. So
Super
we're
early.
asking people to start pretty early in California. And some people start even sooner than that. They take 7 o'clock or 7:30 a.m. meetings, because it helps. There's no ways around it. It helps to have synchronous conversations. They're just faster, right? Not necessarily meetings, even just Slack
Right.
messages.
Ah, okay, I see.
So this sucks. This is something that there's no tool that can solve that, because The earth
Mhm.
spins. and and so we do have that, but we don't really require everybody to be online. It's
Oh,
just
I
that
see.
um, depending on the job, that's when we expect people to schedule meetings between us and California.
Okay, that makes sense.
Um, Sometimes I'll stay later. Uh, I'll work until 7 to meet with people, or I will have after dinner meetings, less and less. But some other people will also do that.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that we do. Just it's always been that way because, like I said, we've had someone in California since the beginning. And then communication policies, we try to stay very light on policies because they just creep up, and the tendency is to have too many. But what we say is that you if you are in Slack in a specific room called announcement, and
Okay.
your little dot is green, it means that you're working and you're probably willing to be interrupted, or
Okay.
receive Slack message. If you're working on something focused and don't want to be interrupted, you just quit Slack and we can't reach you.
Mhm.
So that's really it. And then there's people who manage servers. We have their phone numbers if needed. We have those
Mhm.
classic, if there's a problem, on call policies.
Mhm.
But that's really about it. We don't we like guidelines more than policies. So I don't think we have much about communication style. Just I think that's kind of something that's contagious too. As you're new and you see how people communicate, you kind of tend to adopt that same style. But so we don't really have anything written about that.
Right. Cool. So I think my last question for today is about I've been thinking about this topic about employee happiness and customer happiness. Like
Sure.
I have this hypothesis as in if your team is happy and then your customers will be happy because
Yeah, there was a title yesterday, a study that proved exactly that.
oh really?
I'll look for it again. Yeah,
Right,
it
right.
just came out yesterday.
So yeah, so I was actually thinking to write a blog post about this. So yeah, the hypothesis is that if your team is happy, which I think remote work provides that that added value of flexibility, freedom, and so on, which and is actually will cause your customers to be happier. Why? Because even like if you're a customer support or customer champion, for example, because you're in a good mood every day, you just have this extra friendliness in your when you're replying to tickets, right? Or if you're a sales team, you just have this energy to just do that one more follow-up emails, one more follow-up calls. Um, my question would be, how much do you agree with this, and do you also see this concept reflected on the Balsamiq team?
So I agree with your conclusion, but not with your premise.
Okay.
So working remotely doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be happy,
Yes.
um, at all. In fact,
Right.
it's
It's a philosophical question, even right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But that there is this misconception that oh, working remotely is so great.
Mm-hmm.
Working remotely is great for many reasons, and I wouldn't go back. And
Yeah.
I'm talking out of my home, even though we have an office not far from my house.
Yeah.
I prefer to work at home.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has a lot of drawbacks, loneliness. Humans are social animals. If you don't see anybody all day, it hurts. It hurts your morale. It hurts your body physically too. Um, so I wouldn't say that being remote is what makes you happy. Sure, commuting makes you very unhappy. We know that,
True.
right?
True. Yep. I.
Working in a very loud office makes you
Mm-hmm.
very unhappy, but there's also social aspects of spending time in the same location that are positive for sure.
Mm-hmm.
um, Now the other lesson is that was a kind of eye-opening, is that it's not my job to make my employees happy.
Hmm.
Um, Happiness is an internal thing. It comes from inside. You kind of decide to be happy or not. It's um what my job is. So I can't make you happy. Just like be happy now. You just can't.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so what my job is to create an environment where people who want to be happy can
Yeah.
be happy. Uh, where people feel supported and free to be whatever they want to be. Um, Now, happier employees make happier customers. I want to read that study that came out yesterday too. I'm curious about it.
Yeah.
It makes sense in theory, right? Of course.
True.
Uh, Often, especially with support, right? You when you call
Yeah.
some phone company and you talk to them and you can just see how miserable they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, I'm gonna be unhappy just even because I feel bad for them. Um, you know the trick there is to have good policies that allow people to be have enough freedom to do well by the customer, right? And then they're just applying the policy, which is I'm going to try to help the customer up to a point that we define so that it doesn't drive us out of business, but in general you're free to do that. So that makes you feel better because you're helping other people. And then a designer who needs to design something and while they're depressed, that might not come out as
Yeah.
joyful of a design. And
Right. Right.
but I don't know.
Yeah.
These things are hard to measure,
True.
so I'm to reading how they studied that.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. This has been an amazing episode. We start with a entrepreneurship, remote teams, and we end up talking about happiness.
Well,
Best
that's
episode
what the Italian uncle will do.
ever. All right, awesome, Peldi. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today, and I learned a lot from this conversation. I really hope the audience do learn a thing or two, especially about happiness.
Well, sure. And if anybody has any questions, you can find me at peldi@balsamiq.com.
Right. Oh yeah, about that. Other than email, is there any other place where people can find you online?
Sure. We have a Slack community
You have a
where
Slack
people
community.
can
Okay.
ask anything. I offer an office hours once a week. I meet with someone, usually entrepreneurs,
Hmm.
to give them advice on their business. So all these things you can find on our website, balsamiq.com
Right.
with a Q.
Cool. And for listeners, if you go to Peldi's LinkedIn, you see on the description, and I don't know if it's still there, but I remember looking at your LinkedIn a long time ago, and it said that if you try to poach Balsamiq's employee, I will find you. That's so yeah. I was like, okay, this guy's hardcore. Okay, right. Awesome, Peldi. Again, thank you so much for your time, and wish you a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. And that's it for another episode of Outside the Valley, brought to you by ARC. We created this podcast with the hope that in each episode, you can learn something new from other remote startup people. So if you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at jovian@arc.dev. It's JOVIAN at arc.dev. Or you can find us on Twitter at arc.dev. See you next week with another episode of Outside the Valley, and ciao.